Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today. I'm John Horwich, President and CEO of Easterseals DC, Maryland, and Virginia. As part of our organization's pandemic response, we continue to host candid conversations, webinars to share information, and create a forum to discuss important issues supporting our vision of creating a hopeful, inclusive community where all individuals realize their potential and live meaningful lives. In July, we discussed the impact of the Americans with Disabilities Act and began a conversation on job inequity and disability inclusion in the workplace. Today, in recognition of National Disability Employment Awareness Month, it's my pleasure to welcome you for this follow-up, Disability Employment, the Battle for Equal Opportunities and Access. Companies that successfully incorporate employees with disabilities have 28% higher revenue and 2 times higher net income, according to Accenture. They also experience reduced turnover, lower recruiting costs, increased productivity, and improved customer outreach. This is something that our webinar sponsor, Booz Allen Hamilton, knows very well and has incorporated into its culture. So we're excited to have them as part of this session to share their learnings with you. I hope you will find the conversation meaningful, and thank you for showing your support for Easterseals. Thank you also to our wonderful moderator, Kristen Burset-Harris, host of WUSA 9's Great Day Washington, who's a great friend and advocate for Easterseals families. We're now going to share a poll. Please participate to share your perspectives.
All right, I hope everybody can hear me. Good afternoon, everybody. As John said, my name is Kristen Burset-Harris, host of Great Day Washington. Great to be back with my friends at Easterseals and excited to be having this conversation with the incredible panelists that we have today. A big thank you to Booz Allen Hamilton for your support of this candid conversation and all the support you've always given for Easterseals. I've got some questions. This is how it's going to work. I'm going to go with our panelists and we're just going to discuss some different topics. But before I get to that, I want to introduce to you our panelists for today that have taken the time out to be here and have this conversation with us. So thank you all so very much. Our first panelist is Judy Heumann. Now, she is a lifelong advocate for the rights of disabled people. And a little background on Judy. Judy contracted polio in 1949 and was denied the right to attend school because her wheelchair was deemed a fire hazard. She graduated from Long Island University, received her master's in public health from UC Berkeley. She was a founding member of the Berkeley Center for Independent Living. In 1983, she co-founded the World Institute on Disability. From 1993 to 2001, she served as Assistant Secretary for the Office of Special Education and Rehabilitative Services in the Department of Education, and then as the World Bank's Advisor on Disability and Development. In 2010, she was appointed Special Advisor for International Disability Rights at the U.S. Department of State. Judy's memoir, Being Human, an unrepentant memoir of a disability rights activist, is authored by Kristen Joyner. She influenced the development and implementation of Section 504, the Individuals with Education Act, the ADA, the Rehabilitation Act, and the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. So Judy, we are so glad that you are here with us today.
Thank you.
Another one of our panelists is Meg O'Connell. Meg is CEO, President, and founder of Global Disability Inclusion. Meg is an internationally recognized disability employment expert with 20 plus years of experience providing strategic program design and implementation of disability employment and inclusion programs for global 500 companies, U.S. federal contractors, colleges, universities, nonprofits, and foundations. Meg was Vice President of the National Organization on Disability, implementing Bridges to Business, was the lead architect of the first disability assessment tool, the Disability Employment Tracker, and spent 10 years at Booz Allen Hamilton, where she instigated their resource group for employees with disabilities and won their Global Diversity Award for Individual Contributor. Booz Allen received the New Freedom Initiative Award for their disability employment programs. Meg won the Society of Human Resource Management's Innovative Practice Award, and Meg holds a certificate in ADA mediation, is proficient in ASL, and is a board member of the U.S. International Council on Disabilities. Meg, thank you for being here.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Our other panelist, Eric Wright, is the Senior Lead Technologist Accessibility at Booz Allen Hamilton. Eric Wright, Senior Lead Technologist. He specializes in applying digital accessibility law and policy and developing accessible web applications. Eric is a trainer in Government Section 508 compliance programs, where he has taught for 15 years. He is a member of the Booz Allen's 508 leadership team and co-chair of the Global Disabilities Business Resource Group. Eric volunteers for the Northeast Disabled Athletic Association, a nonprofit in Vermont that enables athletes with physical disabilities to play competitive and recreational sports. So Eric, thank you for being here with us today.
My pleasure.
And our fourth panelist for today, Laurie Armstrong. Laurie is the Ticket to Work manager of Easterseals Disability Staffing Network. She is responsible for implementing and overseeing the daily operations of the two employment networks under SSA's Ticket to Work program. One employment network provides direct employment support services to people with disabilities to assist them with finding and retaining meaningful employment. The other employment network provides administrative services to other disability service providers in compliance with Ticket to Work. Laurie holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Family and Consumer Sciences with a concentration in Child Development and Family Relations from North Carolina Central University. I got that out, Laurie. She has also volunteered at the Horizons program at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, working collaboratively with community professionals in coordinating regional job readiness programs and employment workshops designed to meet the needs of pregnant and postpartum women recovering from alcoholism and substance abuse. She also participated as a panel speaker for Entering the College Zone on behalf of the National Black Child Development Institute to help equip disadvantaged middle school students and their parents with skills and resources to navigate through the college application process. Laurie, thank you so much for being here as well.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
So an incredible group of panelists we have today, and I just want everybody that's watching to know, if you have a question for our panelists, feel free to put it in the chat, and I'm going to lead them through a few questions, but we're definitely going to hopefully leave some time for some of your questions to be answered, something sparks your interest. So please just put it in the chat and they'll pass it on to me. But again, welcome to today's Candid Conversation, Disability, Employment, the Battle for Equal Opportunities and Access. So I'm going to start with this first. And Meg, I'm going to go straight to you, but everybody else, please feel free to piggyback off Meg or answer your thoughts with this. What do you feel is the biggest challenge that our disabled community continues to face in the workplace?
I think it still remains attitudinal barriers. We are still battling the perceptions and the old ways of viewing people with disability, and that really charity model or approach that people with disabilities don't have something to contribute, and they're a group of people to be taken care of rather than a group of people that are talented and capable of contributing in the workforce. So I would say, and I think my fellow panelists would agree with me, that 90% of what we do still is educating employers on the capabilities of individuals with disabilities. So for me, I think it's hands down the attitudinal barriers.
And I'd like to link into that. This is Judy. Let me also say that I'm in my foyer. I'm wearing a red blouse. I have brown hair, and glasses, and behind me are pictures on my wall. I think additionally, we need to be helping hiring managers understand what the law requires. I completely agree with what Meg said. I also feel like government agencies, federal and state, need to really be stepping up more to allow the government and the private sector to more clearly not only understand what their obligations are, but to hold people accountable. The issue of hiring managers still not getting what they need to do is obviously true, but there are things that we need to be doing to correct those problems. And my presumption is that Booz Allen and others are doing some good things to really work with hiring managers to do recruitment, et cetera, so that hopefully in the next couple of years, our answer will not be still needing to get people to understand that we're able to do the job. The other issue is, you know, when we look at disabled individuals, there's so many different types of disabilities. And I think we need to recognize that many of those individuals were actually in the workforce and acquired a disability for whatever reason. And whether or not the businesses are in fact looking at people who currently are working, making sure that if accommodations are needed, that they're provided. And really, I think back to Meg's point, the recognition that disabled individuals have lots to contribute, not just in relationship to the specifics of the job, but I think in being able to work effectively with teams. Many disabled people have to work on a regular basis with many different people in order to allow our lives to move forward. So there are a lot of skills that really can be beneficial to an employer that frequently are not taken into consideration.
And Laurie, do you have a thought on this?
Sure. I agree with both Meg and Judy that I do believe there's a disconnect between the perception and the practice, and that a lot of employers think that we're asking them to take on a charity case. I believe Meg kind of said that they're not getting a full employee, that they're going to be responsible for paying 100% of a salary to someone who can only complete 50% of the job, and that they don't think it's worth it. They think that it's going to take extra time with human resources, that, you know, there may be attendance issues with regard to medical appointments, that there may be unreasonable accommodations that will cost them a lot of money because they don't understand the way the law works and what a reasonable accommodation is, or what types of accommodations are most typical in these. And it just, in theory, I believe a lot of employers want a robust and diverse work group, but aren't really willing to learn to understand it so they can implement it.
Eric, I want to ask you then, in your own life with a disability, you're working for Booz Allen Hamilton. I mean, what has this journey been like for you? And what were some of those roadblocks you hit into finding a place that has welcomed you in?
Thanks for asking. So I'll continue Judy's trend of providing brief audio description. My name's Eric Wright. I have brown hair and glasses. I'm sitting in my home office and wearing a blue and green flannel shirt. My journey to Booz Allen began in college. I went to the University of Vermont, and I was on my way to class when I saw an advertisement for the workforce recruitment program. They were advertising free pizza. At the time, I didn't know what the workforce recruitment program was, but I was compelled by free pizza. So the workforce recruitment program, it's a Department of Labor program that allows the federal government to hire qualified individuals with disabilities non-competitively. And so I did an interview for the WRP. And on the day that I graduated, I got a call from the Air Force asking me if I'd like to join them in a civilian position. And I said, heck no. I had just graduated college. The world was my oyster. no way was I going to take the first job that was offered to me. And of course, I graduated in late 2007. 2007 turned into 2008. And by that time, the stability of government employment was looking really nice. So I did take a job as a federal employee. I was hired to do data entry. Within 3 days on the job, I had automated myself out of a job. I was tasked with taking the shipping numbers from UPS.com and putting them into a spreadsheet. It's nice that they hired a person to do that, but you know, that's something that I was able to write a little program to accomplish that for me. So then the question became, well, what do you want to do? And naturally, as an individual with a disability, I started to gravitate towards reasonable accommodation. So I really started working in providing software to people with disabilities so that they could do their jobs. And as Judy mentioned, you know, as people in the organization acquire disabilities, as their functional needs and limitations change, the assistive technology software helps them stay productive. I've been a user of Dragon Naturally Speaking for over 30 years. I can type. Excellent. Oh, Judy, I'd be thrilled. I can type 60 words a minute. I can dictate 180 words per minute. That's superhuman. Accessibility is efficiency. And I did reasonable accommodation for a while. And I started to realize that the software I was using didn't work everywhere I needed it to. And that's when I learned, oh, there are things going on behind the scenes. It's the fact that these organizations aren't developing accessible websites and web applications. They're not buying accessible workplace software. It's not the fault of the accommodation. It's the fault of the surrounding infrastructure. And that's when I joined Booz Allen, and I've been working on that problem ever since.
Thank you, Eric, for sharing that. So you talk about, I mean, you're working on that. Booz Allen is working on that, but how do we as employers perhaps encourage us as employees, I should say, encourage our employers to get that education, to look into this, you know, to have the accessibility available for any of their employees to use? Is this something that we as employees can do, or is this just a conversation we need to push up the ladder?
That's a great question. So one place to start would be your employees with disabilities. If you have a business resource group, tap them, ask them, hey, what's your day-to-day like? At its heart, accessibility is about recognizing that there are people that use computers differently than the quote unquote typical user. And there are people that do their job differently than the quote unquote normal user. Ask them about it. And you'll be surprised what you can learn from just somebody sharing their day-to-day.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it's not necessarily fair to assume that every disabled employee wants to talk about their experience, or that every disabled employee is or should be considered an accessibility expert, but you might as well start in-house. I bet there are people that are begging to share their pain points.
I think also it gets back for me to, I do believe very much in the laws, and I do believe very much in enforcement. And when talking about technology, things like website accessibility is a very big deal. And I would say that many nonprofits and for-profits do not have website accessibility consistently throughout. And yes, speaking with employees, I think, as Eric said, is a good idea, but there's also many other ways to look at doing this in a streamlined way. But I think most importantly, heads of organizations need to understand, for example, that website accessibility is very important. And I think also when we were talking earlier about diversity and ensuring that businesses understand that inclusion of disabled people is not only an issue for employees, but it's also an issue for your customer base. And so, you know, really looking at how your customers view you, how you are advertising your diversity in many different ways, I think is something that in the end is very important.
It's such a good point, Judy, and there's so many great examples out there of companies that are really radically listening to their customers and their employees. And, you know, we as individuals with disabilities need to not be afraid for asking what we want and what we need in the workplace or as customers. And I think long we have been, you know, kind of, oh, we don't want to put ourselves out, you know, people with disabilities, we're grateful for what we have. And this new generation that's come up is really focused on disability pride and what they can bring to the table. So me growing up as a person with a disability, I was told, you have an invisible disability, don't disclose it unless you have to. Don't ever put yourself out there. And I've learned through my career, it's exactly the opposite. If I talk about my disability and what I need in the workplace, I actually get it. And people aren't resistant of it. They're like, oh, we didn't know. Well, thanks for telling us. And so we see great examples, and Microsoft is my favorite one, of really listening to its employees. And also they have hackathons 2 or 3 times a year where they take problems that their customers have brought forward and they bring together their best coders and their internal resources to try to solve those problems for customers with disabilities. So I think really radically listening to customers and employees is really key for companies so they can truly understand, 1, what is needed, and 2, how it can really be a competitive advantage for them.
And I think it's also following on what you're saying, Meg. It's really important now, Microsoft and the Googles, they're very, very large. Microsoft's done an amazing job of hiring disabled individuals across the organization. And I think that's really helpful. But if you're a smaller company, it's also having someone who can be designated as an individual who understands the issues that need to be addressed. Ideally, they may be a disabled person on your staff already, but if not, you know, like in HR, who's the most knowledgeable. And the point that Eric was making, you know, having an affinity group within the company that really allows for open, honest discussions around how people feel they are being treated within the organization, how they're working with their supervisors. Confidentiality, I think, is really important. And I think it's very important to say, obviously, you know, I had polio in 1949. Things are not the way they were at that period in time. The many laws that have been passed in the Americans with Disabilities Act, in this case, I think is really critical because it covers the public and private sector. But when we look at disability, when we look at Black and Brown and Indigenous and LGBTQ disabled individuals, you know, we really are the very last on the totem pole. And when people, in fact, are speaking about diversity and giving the long list of what they're talking about, disability is hardly ever a word that's included. So I think there's really, you know, a very important role when talking about employment, that the leadership of the organization and the leadership's leadership team needs to be knowledgeable about what their obligations are and needs to make sure that it's being driven throughout the organization, whether it's a 15-person company or 180,000 person company.
We're the forgotten diversity segment, that's for sure. We are the last on the list. You're so right, Judy. And There's a statistic like 90% of companies say they prioritize diversity and inclusion, but only 4% of companies actually have a disability inclusion program. So we have such a huge gap. You know, as we think about 30 years since the ADA, and I've been in this field 25-ish of those years, I feel like in many instances, I'm still having the same conversations with companies that I had 25 years ago. So it's a slow evolution for people with disabilities to be treated on par and have programs similar to other diversity initiatives.
I also want to say that universities need to be playing a better job in this role, as do primary and high school. And the reason I raised the issue of universities, you know, while there's disability studies that's occurring on more campuses, really, by and large, disability is not a part of the curricula. You know, even when looking in the area of technology, when you speak to the Googles and the others around the world, actually really around the world, but here right now in the US, one of the things you hear people saying is that people are graduating from college, and in fact, they don't have the skills that they need to be able to do things like Eric was discussing on accessibility. And that's really something which is imperative. You need to be able to be hiring a workforce, disabled and non-disabled individuals, who in particular fields really understand disability, now that the employer then has to be retraining people and is not able to give them what they need.
And Laurie, for when it comes to staffing too, do you have any examples of barriers that you have come across for those of us that are maybe watching, don't have a disability, don't know somebody with disability, but are wanting to learn more? Like, what are some of these barriers?
So some of the barriers are that I come across with clients that are looking for employment, are that there's a fear of being rejected or of being discriminated against. So they're hesitant to try to obtain certain types of positions. They may have a long history of unemployment, or they have, you know, gaps within their employment, and are afraid that that's going to impact them negatively as well. Some other barriers have been that, you know, their previous experiences in employment have shown that supervisors and managers haven't had the correct training to interact with them or to work with them and make them feel respected or to support them. And sometimes they just don't feel that it's worth it. And we almost have to change the mind of our client to help them identify if this is something that they really want. A lot of times they feel that they don't have any marketable skills, or what they used to do in the past is something that they cannot do anymore, and just don't know which way to go. We do try to help them identify, different fields of work that they may be able to move into, or training opportunities or growth opportunities. But a lot of times the clients themselves are in their own way because they bought into the fact that they're just not the same as everyone else, that they don't have the same capabilities. And that's unfortunate. They have so much to give and so much to offer, and they provide such a great presence in the culture of a business, you know, for the other staff, the peers, and as someone said earlier, for even the clients of the companies. So that a lot of times stands in the way.
I think also it's a great point that you're making. We need to realize that too frequently, disabled individuals, younger ones in particular, have not been getting internships or mentorships. So they have, I'm certainly not saying everyone, because you certainly are seeing younger disabled people who are benefiting from the ADA and Section 504 and IDEA and have gone to regular schools, gotten decent educations. But the lack of internships and mentorships can really make a big difference. And it's not just for disabled individuals, but for people who feel marginalized, disabled individuals who have multiple diversities. I think organizations like Disability In and the American Association of People with Disabilities, have some very good programs where there are internships and mentorships that are occurring, and you see much better results for people who in fact have had internships and mentorships for a number of reasons. One, the mentors they have come from companies. And if the mentors are having good experiences with the people they're working with, you also see a higher rate of people actually getting jobs. And for people who are able to do internships, again, they are in a business where others are seeing their performance. And I think that really, in many ways, breaking bread together, whether it's literally or not, is really an important way to observe, to talk to people, and get a better understanding. I think we've got to raise COVID right now in the middle of everything going on. And I know that, people are talking about the value of being able to work out of your home. And certainly for some people, that's very true, whether they're disabled or not. But I think we also need to recognize that disabled people, talking about myself, for example, my a goal in life has not always been to have to work out of my house. I believe it's really important to be able to interact with people as it's needed. What we've learned, I think, from COVID, not just for disabled people, but others, is there are different ways that we can do our work. And I think that's a lesson we have to obviously look at. But I'm also very concerned about the number of disabled people who have lost jobs since COVID. I'm also very worried about the changing types of jobs that are out there, and whether or not we are looking at having disabled people at the table when discussions are going on about the job economy and how it's changing. So many of the things that we're discussing were true pre-COVID, but now COVID, however long it's going to last, is going to also have an additional impact. And I want to make sure that we are a part of those discussions for re-entry, not after this has left us, that we're then once again at the end of the line.
Yeah, Judy, we were right there. That's where I was going next with COVID and how it's changed everything for everybody. Some people like it from home, some people don't. You touched on, your goal was to never work from home. What other, Eric, I'm going to go to you too, with the technology, it seems like from the outside, wow, this could be so much easier, right? We're all connected virtually. We can do a lot more things. But what is this really doing, not just to society as a whole, but specifically the disabled community? How is it impacting the disabled community?
Sure. So I think both pre-COVID and now, accessibility is about infrastructure. It's just how that infrastructure has changed. When I graduated college, I'd like to say that the world was my oyster, but I really only had two options. I couldn't drive then, I still can't drive now. So realistically, my only options were cities with good mass transportation. I looked at New York, I looked at DC, I realized that DC had an elevator at every stop and decided, oh, I'm going to DC. Now, being able to, not have to contend with the physical effort and the physical barriers with getting to work, that's nice. And that opens up so many more options. But now it's critical. What's it mean to go to work now? Whether it's logging into something like Zoom or, using your enterprise chat software, whatever it means to go to work now, that needs to be accessible too. Just like you would put a ramp or an automatic door opener on your building, make sure your digital stuff is accessible too.
I think we don't think about that. And just off the top, from Judy and you giving visual cues for those that are watching, I didn't think to do that, right? Most of the meetings I'm on, we haven't had to do that. I don't know if there's been any discussions about that. So just learning the little things like that make the experience so much easier, so much better for everyone, really. But you think digitally it's going to be so much easier, but it presents its own new set of challenges too.
I also want to say, you know, I was just on a Zoom call with people from around the world, and people were complaining. It was a board meeting, that the inability for people to really get to know each other and to do everything online. There certainly is an important aspect to work that you can do online and that you don't always have to be together. But in many cases, the ability, you know, even in your day-to-day job, to come together and be able to, you know, go to your neighbor next door and say, oh, I'm sorry, how's your family doing? You don't do that on a Zoom call. And maybe you can call the person, but it's really very easy when you're in the office to go over and say something that can take less than a minute, as opposed to what it would take to set up the Zoom call, get it into the schedule, blah, blah. And I do, you know, personally really value teamwork and creativity. I really do believe that teamwork does support creativity. So I think, you know, everyone knows that we've evolved over decades about the types of workspace people believe we need to have. And I think, you know, what's going on with COVID is very important in that regard. But my bottom line point is, do not look at disabled people being relegated to being the ones that are going to be working at home, but look at what is best for the company and making sure that disabled individuals like Eric and myself really can get the kinds of supports that we need to be able to work in the office and to get to and from the office.
That's
The
such a
one
great point
piece,
to bring up. You know, Meg, I was coming to you anyway. That's such a good point to bring up, of just to not relegate the disabled community to home. I mean, in some uneducated eyes, it would seem perfectly fine or the easiest situation, where the goal is to come into the office and be with others. Meg, I'm going to go over to you.
Yeah, I was just going to say, you know, the flip side of that is we're seeing companies talk about mental health in new and actually exciting ways because of what's happened with COVID. And to Judy and Eric's point about the connections that you have with your coworkers. And in many cases, I mean, my parents are in their 80s and they were talking the other day how they haven't seen their grandchildren since last Thanksgiving, and, you know, the gaps that we're all feeling. So we're seeing companies really focus on mental health and offer new services, new resources. Managers are being trained on how to have better mental health conversations. With COVID-19 likely to be with us for a while and to be considered a disabling condition is what we're hearing that it's going to be. We're going to continue these conversations about disclosure, accommodations, what people need in the workplace. And I think the good that's going to come out of this is that there's going to be a new openness to have those discussions around disability, employment, access, and inclusion in ways that companies weren't ready to before COVID. So if there's any silver lining to COVID, I would say it's that, because we see companies truly wanting to take an interest in how to support one another, how to change operations and their infrastructure so they work for everybody, not just how do we accommodate people with disabilities. So I think that's the one positive thing that's coming out of COVID in the midst of all the madness that COVID has brought us.
Right. And Laurie, are you seeing, I mean, we're all learning something new, right, during this time, new skills. Are you seeing a push or interest in learning, you know, new digital skills? What have we seen just in terms of the evolution of the education when it comes to learning these skills?
It's a great question. It's a mixed bag, a mixed answer. We have people who are interested in developing new skills and want to learn how to use technology, want to broaden, you know, their skill set. And we have others that don't show that type of interest, are not looking to to continue that type of development just want to work.
Right.
They just want to work. And whatever that takes, whatever skills they currently have, and a lot of times they have enough skills to do some of the jobs that they want to do, and they're not getting selected and they're not getting called back. And some of these jobs have very, very specific requirements. They say that they're an equal opportunity employer, and yet it's very specific what the job duties require. And if they're not able to meet every single job requirement, then they're not even being considered.
I want to get to, we got a couple of comments in the chat that go along with what we were just talking about. Maddie Cameron wrote, "Hi from the UK." So hi, Maddie. With a large and diverse team to organize and communicate with, how can I ensure that the type of communications I send and use are completely inclusive for my team and accessible now as well as in the future? So Eric, you want to go with that one?
Sure. There are wonderful resources out there. Disability In was mentioned before, and I'll second that. The international standard for accessibility is WCAG, WCAG, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. And for most organizations throughout the US, WCAG applies to all of your digital properties. So not just your websites, but your emails and your documents and your video platforms like this. So WCAG's got the answers, but WCAG is also technical jargon and legalese. So there are ways to make it practical and make it approachable. WCAG is maintained by the W3C, the World Wide Web Consortium. They're an international standards body that does standards for like HTML and CSS and stuff that everybody uses. And their Web Accessibility Initiative, WAI, has this wonderful resource called Easy Checks. And it's the top 5 tests that anybody can do at their desk to see if it's accessible. It's a great place to start. And if you'd like to learn more, come find me.
Maybe Easterseals could put up those links later.
Yeah,
Sorry,
absolutely.
Meg.
I know they're putting some up in the chat as we go along, but just so everybody knows, you will get a kind of a follow-up email, and they will include these links and resources because there's some great information being shared here. So if you didn't get it written down, you will get it in the follow-up email. Eric, thank you for that. And I think it kind of goes back to what you and Judy and all of us have been talking about with if you have to say certain employees that you're concerned about, reach out to them, right? Have, whether you, even if you're not creating the affinity group, but you know there's certain people that are on your mind that you might be concerned about or want to make sure they feel included. It's okay to reach out and ask, like, really, what's working for you, what's not. I think, Eric, you agree with that?
That's such a great point, because I think a lot of managers don't ask those questions, but make that part of the conversation with your teams before you're having a team meeting. Does anybody need an accommodation? Or you're having an event, are there accommodations that are needed? And some people naturally do them. Oh, we know of people that sit in the front of the room because they have a hearing impairment, or they don't want to sit in the back because they can't see as well. So a lot of people do that naturally, but to include that as part of the conversation is a great way to start that dialogue.
And I think if it's okay, Kristen, someone asked a question about how would you mix in larger societal changes like global warming in the conversation. I think it's an excellent question for a number of reasons. One, global warming is causing more disability. I think, categorically, respiratory conditions, cancer, asthma, things of that nature, people are acquiring more disabilities, not just here in the US, but around the world. And it's a new industry, or a growing industry. So there are potentially many new jobs that are being created in the green economy And the reason why I thought this question was particularly good is we need to make sure that disabled individuals, regardless of the type of disability they have or the onset when they acquired their disability, we need to be getting trained to work in the jobs of today and tomorrow. We need to stop being trained for jobs that are basically going away, and looking at people who have intellectual and developmental disabilities, people who have mental health disabilities and other forms of disabilities, where they may not be going to universities, may not be getting certain types of skill, may not be exposed to certain types of learning experiences. One, I think we need to recognize that even that model is obviously an incorrect one. As Eric was saying, you know, there's so many things now that we can be doing with technology to help people learn more than people expected them to be able to do. And environmentally, the new types of jobs that some people are really arguing for and advancing are jobs that disabled people need to be able to obtain.
Now, a couple other questions I want to keep going with and here. Got some great people in this chat. Kamika asks, how can the business community in general support global education systems and placements to be disability inclusive?
Well, I would say, you know, again, groups like Disability In and National Organization on Disability, and these types of groups that have global businesses involved. I think it's really getting a better understanding and working with some of these global organizations. Many of them are doing more work in the area of disability. And so if this is an area that you're interested in, I think many of these companies now are actually doing some more work. And Meg, you've also done work in this area. What's your thought on this?
Yeah, I see companies making progress in this area, so it's really, you know, an exciting time. But at the heart of it is companies understanding that disability should not be an afterthought when they talk about their workforce. It should be all inclusive. We have to stop paying people with disabilities sub-minimum wage. And companies that I work with, a lot of times they don't even know that they're doing it. So it's really educating them about equity and inclusion and what that means for people with disabilities. I mean, if we talked about any other diversity group making sub-minimum wage, the country would be in complete outrage, but for some reason it's okay for people with disabilities. So having those educated conversations about equity and equal pay and equal access is just so important.
And I think on this question, what can we do to address some of the barriers to employment, like mobility and public transportation? I mean, I would say that companies really need to be involved in what's going on in their communities. So companies, and they are in certain areas, you know, where cities are very expensive to live in, companies are now realizing they're having to provide transportation, or at least pre-COVID, getting people to and from work. Well, one of the things they need to be looking at is, like in New York City, when new subways are being built or renovated, where is the business community? What are they saying in relationship to ensuring that the law is complied with? And regardless of the law, which I do think is critically important, the business community needs to say, our employees and our future employees need to have access. It is unacceptable to us as an employer in XYZ cities that this is happening. I think issues like accessibility of housing is something employers need to be involved with. Employers need to be involved with the cost of housing. And employers also need to be involved in listening to disabled employees in a real meaningful way, to look at some of the ways that the companies outside of what they're producing, they could be doing. So, you know, one of the big issues for a good number of disabled people is something called home and community-based services. For people who need support in getting up in the morning and getting dressed and getting to work and getting it, you know, on and on. There are punitive programs that exist in many states. If you in fact go to work and you earn above a certain amount of money for that and Social Security, you can lose your benefits. These are things that the disability community has been discussing for decades, and for disabled veterans, they don't have the same problem. They have a system which is much more addressed the way the civilian population should get it. So employers need to be involved more broadly to ensure not just for the disabled employees, but for other employees, that laws and policies work in alignment with what they're trying to do.
Eric, I found that really interesting about your story of where you chose to live, right? I mean, you chose to live based on which had more accessibility for you, which makes sense. But the fact that that had to be the factor in there, and you came to DC, it's a great place to come to, but makes total sense. I want to go to you on that, but also we just got one more going off what Judy was talking about from Lynn Smith. Do you think it would be wise if large entities would negotiate with Uber or Lyft, for example, to get reduced rates or arrangements to move disabled workers to and from work and their activities?
Yep, I think it's an excellent idea. And we see examples of companies doing some of this already, where they'll buy the bus stops, 2 miles from their location, and they've purchased a van. So someone runs a shuttle to pick up employees who, can't walk the 2 miles to the facility. We've seen companies go and advocate to their local transportation boards and say, the bus stops 2 miles from my facility. Can you make another stop 2 miles down in front of our facility? And sure, it takes a while, but we've had 2 or 3 companies that have been able to get that done in different locations because they needed the talent and they wanted to hire people with disabilities. So there are ways that companies can be creative about improving transportation and access. And to the question that was raised, Uber and Lyft are such a great opportunity now for folks to get access to transportation that they wouldn't have before. So I think it's an excellent idea for companies to engage in that.
Eric?
So, sure. This is Eric, and just to kind of hit on a recurring theme we've had through this conversation. Yes, explore options like Uber and Lyft, but make sure to listen to your disabled stakeholders. As someone who's been denied service by both Uber and Lyft,
Exactly.
I'm not sure that I would feel comfortable knowing that they're a reliable way to get to work. You had mentioned, being surprised about accessibility being a deciding factor in where I work. But the thing I've learned with over 30 years of having a disability is disability is constant logistics. Not only is it, where am I going to live, but even where am I going to work and who can I apply to? Dirty little secret, I was hired by Booz Allen in a bar at an accessibility event. And it's a good thing that I was, because at the time, our career site wasn't accessible. And take a look at yours. If you're a business owner out there now, when you put job listings out there, are they accessible? Is your job application submission stuff accessible? If I wanted to apply for a job at your company, could I? Or are you unintentionally excluding people?
Great point. And I want to just say also on the Uber Lyft issue, taxis in many of the cities are buying accessible taxis. And in fact, many, and certainly in the DC and surrounding area, there are programs that do in fact allow you to pay a lower rate and that the driver is compensated. And that the Ubers and Lyfts are putting regular accessible taxis off the road and then not providing an appropriate service. And also the benefit that you can get from using regular taxis you cannot get when you use Uber and Lyft. So I think the idea that that was being put forward is the right idea, the broader issue, not looking at labels of companies, being able to have more accessible, available transportation. That I think is the crux of this issue, and we all agree on that.
Yeah. We are about 5 minutes out from our thing, so before we wrap up and get to our poll, I do want to ask, because this question was posed, and since we're 3 weeks away from the presidential election, do you have advice for people with disabilities who want to vote electronically? Not all states have that. What things should we be thinking about when it comes to this election?
I would suggest that people go to Rev Up, which is on the AAPD website, American Association of People with Disabilities. They have information by state. I would also call your Board of Elections if you have questions. And for me, most importantly, you look at voting for candidates up and down the line. You look at your candidates' records on disability. Do they have a record of being able to demonstrate that they are talking with the disabled community? Do they have a record of hiring disabled people? I mean, it's not a secret. I'm a Democrat, and I worked in both the Clinton administration and Obama administration. When you look at the Trump administration, the job that I had previously has never been filled. They do not have a record of doing what I think many of us believe is important, but your party affiliation is up to you. But these are broad things that I think you need to look at. And fundamentally, the question that was being asked is if you want to vote absentee and you have questions about whether you can do that, then call your board and find out what the rules are.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Judy, this is Eric. And if I can just add on to that, certainly, call your board, call your town office, find out what your options are. But to your point, elections have consequences. And if there are people out there on Twitter looking to find out more about the issues and how specifically they're going to impact people with disabilities, check out #CryptTheVote.
Right.
That's #CryptTheVote. It's a wonderful resource for some of the disability issues in this election.
Thank you, Eric.
Thank you, Eric, for that. Laurie, real quick, I want you to leave with those that are, wanting to be out in the workforce and are looking for something. What words of advice can you give to them, and just some, to pick them up, some motivation for them?
Just that, there are organizations and there are advocacy groups that are out here to help them, and that, everybody has the right to find meaningful employment. And we know about the barriers, the transportation issue. That was one of the biggest problems with COVID. People overlooked the fact that there were whole bus routes that were in train routes that were completely shut down, and the schedules were off track. And so people who didn't lose their job still couldn't get to work. And but there are people out here that are aware of some of their concerns about losing their disability benefits, because the how benefits are impacted by earnings is such a convoluted process that even with benefits counseling, there's still a paranoia and a fear that work will take me off my benefits, and if something happens, I'll just be out here unable to pay for my medication, unable to live. So just really that there are people to support you, to help you through this process, to help you become successful, to help you face those different barriers that exist, and to advocate on your behalf. Just think it's very important. But again, just letting them know that there's someone out there that understands and will take the time to explain and work them through the process. I want to just let everybody know that the beneficiaries that I work with all receive disability from Social Security, and they are notoriously delayed administratively. And so people have gone out and found employment and reported employment timely, and still a year later or 2 years later receive huge overpayment letters that they owe tens of thousands. And that makes people not so trusting of of the consequences of employment. And so it's not always the employers. We have to work so hard with our clients to make them comfortable enough to take that chance. But that's what we're here for. We'll walk you through that journey, and we're here to support you.
It's amazing to know there's somebody there. And Eric, Judy, Laurie, Meg, thank you all for being here to help support and to have this conversation. Before we go, I want to get the poll results up. If Christine can pop those up. We asked, please select all motivators for joining this panel. The biggest one, advocate for disability inclusion in the workplace. I think we had some great conversations about that and hope you got some ideas and especially some resources to really help you with that. Also, does your current employer have a disability inclusion program? 69% wrote yes, so that's great numbers. There are some that don't know, which is great, something you can go ask. But 14% said no. That needs to get down to 0. Right? We need to get that down to 0. So thank you again for answering those questions. Thank you to our panelists. This is a conversation we could keep having. I know there's so many topics we want to continue, and this is the second of one that we've had, so maybe we'll have our third and continue this. Visit Easterseals.com to find out everything that they do. And again, look for a follow-up email with the resources that our panelists have mentioned and some contact information as well, if maybe you have some follow-up questions. I know Eric said, come find them. You know, Vermont's beautiful this time of year, Eric. I'm just kidding.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all so much, and have a great rest of your day. We appreciate all of you. Thank you.
Eric, send me your information.
Will do.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
All right.